Some of these historic cases where in different industries, Chinese companies have come out, they've been able to do things at much, much lower prices. Yes, that is happening in AI models right now.
Spilling over to geopolitics as well, considering banning some of these cutting edge AI models out of China that got a lot of buzz over the weekend on
Later.
硅谷现在最怕的不是中国 AI 追上来了，是中国 AI 追上来的方式跟比亚迪一模一样，性能不输你，价格把你打穿，然后还开源让你自己拿去免费用。上周月之暗面发布的 Kimi K3 就是这剧本的第3季，第1季是 DeepSeek， 第2季是通义千问，现在轮到 Kimi 了。美国一众分析师在节目里直接搬出了比亚迪的历史，当年底特律也是这么笑比亚迪的，现在全球每3辆电动车就有1辆是比亚迪的。中国 AI 太可怕了，也许是时候封禁了。来看美媒是怎么报道的。
So you do have some of these historic cases where in different industries, Chinese companies have come out, they've been able to do things at much, much lower prices. Yes, that is happening in AI models right now, and you've got a whole series of them. DeepSeek, Moonshot now, there's Minimax, there are others that are coming out with these less expensive models.
So, Peter, how do you read this moment? Do you think that it's a DeepSeek version 2, or do you think it's something different? Because now a lot of the tech companies kind of had an idea of what DeepSeek could do, but this is Moonshot, and maybe it's something new altogether.
Yeah, I think the tech companies in the U.S. in particular thought they knew where the competition was coming from in China, and this was a bit of a surprise. We had seen the DeepSeek moment last year, as you had talked about. There were some other players that were kind of prominent, including Alibaba, the e-commerce company that has a strong model in Gwen in particular. But then over the weekend, we got this news from Moonshot that they'd introduced Kimi K3, which is a very powerful model. It outstrips most of the frontier models on many parameters, except for the 2 leading ones from Anthropic and OpenAI. So it's a very strong performer. It has 2.8 trillion parameters, which is sort of like equivalent to brain synapses. It's a very powerful model. And I think that surprised people that there was yet another Chinese company that was able to come and compete with the best from Silicon Valley on a number of parameters at cost that people really don't understand at this point. Many of these Chinese models are also open source or open weight, so they're much less expensive. They're offered very broadly. If you don't want to run them on somebody else's computer systems, you can run them on your own. Also, you can take the model and then run it so that can avoid some of the security concerns around Chinese models. But it is a very serious threat for some of these frontier models in the U.S. that had been planning on charging premium prices. Now there may be some pricing pressure on what they're able to charge their customers, and that may make it a little bit more difficult as we see OpenAI and Anthropic try to go public in the near future. Both of them want to get valuations that are above $1 trillion each. That may be a little bit more challenging today.
Right, and it challenges the whole CapEx thesis and the whole AI stack. Peter, Isabel made a really good point earlier when we were talking on our pre-show call, basically comparing this to BYD. I mean, BYD, you have this Chinese technology that's just as good, as not better, than other EVs in the US, and it's cheaper. But notably, in America, you can't buy a BYD. Do we hear any noise coming from government officials about trying to curtail the usage of some of these Chinese models?
There are questions about this. I mean, you make a very good point. China has been able to compete in a number of different areas, not just electric vehicles, but also solar panels, steel, for example. So you do have some of these historic cases where in different industries, Chinese companies have come out, they've been able to do things at much, much lower prices. Yes, that is happening in AI models right now, and you've got a whole series of them. DeepSeek, Moonshot now, there's Minimax, there are others that are coming out with these less expensive models. And there has been some discussion about whether we should try to bar those companies from competing in the U.S. I think the challenge there is that you may be hurting American companies by forcing them to use more expensive models or less capable models. There are open source models in the U.S. too, but I think when you look at the leading edge of open source right now, these less expensive models, they're really Chinese companies at this point. So if you take away a tool that companies want to use to be able to incorporate AI into their businesses, you may end up hurting American businesses that are not the AI leaders. So you may perhaps help the AI frontier companies, but you may punish other companies in other parts of the economy.
Peter, so interesting.
Remember, chip stocks fell into a bear market Friday, in part because of questions posed by the release of Kimi K3 by China's Moonshot. We're off session highs right now, but the Nasdaq 100 adding almost a percentage point, the stocks up 2%. And it's a lot of the compute names, Nvidia, but also memory names that are driving some upside in those public markets. Since Moonshot released its Kimi K3 model last week, everyone's debating what it really means. Does more efficient AI mean less hardware? Is China closing the gap faster than we expected? Where does AI's real value ultimately accrue? Joining us now is Crosslink Capital partner Mary Donofrio, focused on venture growth investments, but across software, AI, and infrastructure. And for the last 3 days, I've said Kimi K3 many times. But it was interesting to take a sort of straw poll of VCs, founders, people in industry of how they react to it so differently. Some people are very fearful, defensive. Others say this is very good for AI as a whole. Very difficult job first thing on a Monday, but your reaction to what happened?
Well, Kimi K3, as you said, was phenomenal, and it's similar to the DeepSeek moment we had last year.
Right.
2.8 trillion parameter model, and what it demonstrates, I think, is that China and open weight models are closing the gap with frontier models. Obviously, it was done based on their own benchmarking, but according to the benchmarks,
yes,
they're fourth. And while you can debate the merits of those benchmarks themselves, the productivity gains are tremendous, and I think that in general it is part of the pathway towards more widespread open weight model usage. And in the context of enterprise budgets ballooning in
yes,
AI, I actually think that it's probably a boon for AI ubiquity over time.
When you think about your existing portfolio of companies, were you sort of okay, how does this impact the trajectory? Has anything actually fundamentally changed for the different pieces of the AI 5-layer cake that you're invested in?
I don't know if it changes the cake itself, but I do think it's another demonstration that models keep leapfrogging one another, and if companies don't out-innovate, they're going to be leapfrogged too. Whether it's every single model seems to outperform the last, and it's a matter of out-innovating by creating moats of data, of performance, of customer resonance, and otherwise, unfortunately, the innovations in both frontier and open weight models is tremendous.
It's not a sophisticated argument, but when this all happened, a lot of people came out and said, well, if a $20 billion Chinese startup can do a 2.8 trillion parameter model with these economics, why are we assigning OpenAI and Anthropic a valuation of $1 trillion? They looked at the sort of fundamentals of that. Is that the right way to think about it?
Frankly, I don't know yet, and I don't think anybody knows yet, because even in the context of those questions, Anthropic and OpenAI are still producing billions and billions of revenue, and it's not just from their they have first-party businesses, they have third-party businesses, and I think obviously the API opened for Moonshot, but the open weights have not yet.
Yeah, 27th of July.
And it's worth noting that because it's open weight doesn't mean it's free to run, and so I think that's a dynamic to these models that people potentially underappreciate as well.
So much back and forth, Kate, for today's Tech Check.
Kelly, so much to cover. A lot of it has to do with China. You mentioned Alibaba taking the spotlight this week with its preview of a model that it claims now is a runner-up to rival Anthropic's best version out there. These are internal benchmarks so far, so we'll see where they stack up in the coming weeks. It does come after Moonshot's Kimi AI model took the tech world by storm just last week. According to independent benchmarks, it is almost on par with Anthropic's and OpenAI's best versions out there. It is also the world's largest open weight model. Did see a lot of demand. The company saying over the weekend that they are pausing subscriptions. That goes back to the compute conversation. CEOs I'm talking to, though, really are framing this new generation out of China as a capability shock. The takeaway has been it is no longer a given that the U.S. frontier labs have a safe lead in AI. It is starting to show up in some of the data. OpenRouter, for example, showing Chinese models overtook U.S. usage last week. If you measure that by token usage, this could be a lot of experimenting out there, Kelly, but we'll see where that does net out. OpenAI chairman Brett Taylor on Squawk Box earlier did pour a little bit of cold water on the idea that this all just comes down to cost. he said they may be a little less efficient.
The thing that I think is a little bit overblown about these open weight models is they're not necessarily cheaper to run. Whether or not they're cheaper to train, you don't care.
All of this, Kelly, is spilling over to geopolitics as well. A report from Axios this morning says the U.S. is now considering banning some of these cutting-edge AI models out of China. That got a lot of buzz over the weekend on Twitter, Kelly.
Kimi K3 这次最狠的一招不是参数，是开源。中国公司过去被骂只会抄袭，后来被骂只会搞封闭生态，现在他们把模型开源了，全球所有人免费用，随便下载随便改，这你没法再骂了，因为说你就会抄吧，人家自己从头训练的，你手里那些能对标的东西也是自己训的，人家还比你便宜50倍，说你搞封闭吧，人家说那好吧，我开源给你看。这个剧本从来没在硅谷的应急手册里出现过。硅谷过去3年一直在内部辩论同一个问题：开源会不会吃掉闭源的午餐？ OpenAI 说不会， Anthropic 说不会，因为他们相信最好的模型永远需要最昂贵的训练。然后 DeepSeek V3 开了，综合基准测试跟 GPT-4o 几乎拉不开差距，训练成本据估算只有500多万美元，是 GPT-4o 的一个零头。然后是阿里的通义千问困 2.5， 开源权重在多个内部基准上已经追到 Claude Sonnet 身后一个身位的位置。全球开发者下载量冲到模型排行榜第2，现在 Moonshot 也开了 Kimi K3 28000亿参数，独立基准跟 Claude 最强版只差1-2个百分点。3个中国模型排成一排，每一个都踩在同一条路径上，用远低于硅谷的成本造出几乎一样好的东西，然后开源让你自己去验证。这已经不是单个公司的事了，这是中国 AI 产业的结构性产出。这3个例子里，每一个开源的逻辑各不相同，这才是最让硅谷难受的地方。DeepSeek 开的核心是性价比，它用混合专家架构在训练阶段就压了成本，然后用开源把成本优势分享给所有人，等于是说我花了500万训的东西，你免费拿去跑，你花5000亿训的东西，凭什么让我付钱？阿里的开源逻辑是生态锁，困开源后，全球开发者基于它做了成千上万个定制版本和微调应用，这些应用再回流到阿里云的模型服务生态里，不管你跑谁的版本，底层算力总有一部分落在阿里云上。开源不吃你的授权费，但要你的云账户。Moonshot 的开源逻辑更直接，公司估值才20亿美元，没有万亿包袱，不需要填估值故事里的营收窟窿，干脆把模型扔出去，让全球开发者自己玩。口碑传播本身就是最好的融资材料，3+3个打法，共同效果是全球开源模型的领先位置被中国公司坐稳了。CNBC 采访的那个分析师说 Kimi K3 是开放权重模型，不代表免费运行，还有推理费用，这是在偷换概念。要付推理费这件事是所有模型的共同前提，你跑 Claude 也得给云厂商付钱，跑 Kimi K3 也得付。云费是所有玩家平摊的基础设施成本。硅谷前沿实验室能拿来填万亿估值的，从来不是云费，是模型授权费，是 API 调用抽成。现在开源把模型本身的定价踩到0，你凭什么收那层溢价？这才是从根上炸掉了估值模型。中国公司把开源当成战略武器在用，这不是一句比喻。美国用芯片封锁算力供应，试图卡住中国 AI 的喉咙。中国用开源锁住你的商业模式，让你的定价权自焚。你没办法进开源，开源不经过海关，不需要签证，不需要任何人的批准。它是互联网的原始协议，是 HTTP 和 TCP 的同一种逻辑。你不可能通过立法禁止 HTTP。硅谷这次被自己开创的互联网底层规则反噬了。如果要把时间线拉长来看，这个局面3年前就已经埋下了。2022年，美国开始限制高端 GPU 出口中国。硅谷当时的主流判断是，中国 AI 很快就会被卡死，算法再强你也得跑在硬件上，硬件卡住你，算法就是纸上谈兵。3年过去了，回头看那个判断，它只对了一半，硬件确实被卡住了。中国公司拿不到最先进的英伟达旗舰卡，但算法层面呢？中国 AI 团队被逼着把每一张卡都炸到了极限，混合专家架构、动态量化、稀疏激活、流水线并行、张量分片，所有能省算力的优化手段都被中国团队从头翻出来啃了一遍。因为你没卡，你必须把算法效率提到你对手根本不需要达到的高度。你的对手够卡，随便烧，浪费一点无所谓。你不浪费，浪费对你来说是致命。 结果是被卡脖子的那一方在效率上反超了。这跟当年航天领域发生的故事一模一样。美国在2011年通过沃尔夫条款，禁止 NASA 与中国航天合作，试图把中国锁在国际空间站门外。10年后，中国独立建成了自己的天宫空间站，嫦娥从月球背面采回了至今为止人类最古老的一块月壤，祝融踏上火星表面，传回了天空照片。每一次封锁都精准地逼出了一项你本以为他们不可以能独立完成的东西。航空航天是这样，北斗是这么来的。28纳米光刻机已经开始量产出货，现在 AI 也在走完这条已经被验证过无数次的路径。Kimi K3 的开源不是一次技术发布，是一封递到全球开发者手边的邀请函，上面只写了一句话：不用买他们的，先用着，看看谁更好。20亿美元估值的月之暗面写了这封信，上亿美元估值的硅谷巨头被这封信塞住了嘴，他们没法反驳，因为任何一家硅谷巨头都不敢把自己最强模型开源，开了就真的没了任何收入来源。但你不开源，中国科技公司就会替你开，替你抢占全球开发者的硬盘和心智。反打人的总是比被打的主动一步，先开源的人总是把定价权攥在自己手里。你还在算每 token 多少钱？我已经说不要钱了，你跟还是不跟？